today.
Good way to start the webinar.
Not that it's an exceptional day in that sense. You know, like you look wonderful every day.
That's to all the attendees. Everybody's having a good day. The sun's out.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I know we're waiting for a few more people, but that's okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending and participating in Summit's the Alchemy of Program Evaluation webinar. My name is Lisa Hasso. I'm the Operations and Marketing Manager here at Summit. Before getting started, I did want to just go over a few housekeeping items with everyone. All audio and video have been turned off except for our moderator and panelists. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar. We just ask that you enter them into the chat and they will be responded to in an appropriate manner. There will be 3 polls taken during the webinar, so please plan on participating. This webinar is also going to be recorded and will be sent out to all attendees after the webinar. So if there's no questions, I think we can go ahead and get started. Kate, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. Thank you for everybody attending our webinar. We're really excited to share this information with you. So today you'll hear from the Summit team members that design and implement program evaluations and that they seek to use evidence to improve outcomes in people's lives. You'll hear about the type of programs, evaluations, and how to decide which type is best for your program. You'll also hear about the different methods used to conduct evaluations. And throughout today's webinar, you'll hear about how program evaluations help programs use data to make better decisions today and in the future to make people's lives better by improving program access, delivery, impacts, or identifying what works to drive government investment decisions. So today we've got a few poll questions that we're going to share with you and hope that you click some buttons and let us know a little bit about you. We'd like to hear from you about, the first is where you work. So Lisa, if you could roll the first poll question, that would be lovely. Are folks able to use the polling? We have a few folks that have responded. If you can get a few more, that would be lovely. Great. Give folks just a second more. Thank you so much for submitting the poll questions. We'll take a quick break there. The other poll question that we have for you today is, have you been part of a program evaluation before? Just to give us a sense of kind of your experience working with program evaluation, either as someone who has been through the process from a program perspective, or if you've conducted one, or if this is new to you. So Lisa, if you could put up the next poll question, we'll be able to get started. Great. Thank you so much. And then we'll have folks click and you can pick, you know, I'm not sure, or I know I've been part of the process, whatever works for you. Wonderful. I'd like to introduce today's panelists so that you get a sense of who they are, and they'll go over their bios and give you a bit of background on how they became a program evaluator and what they find the most interesting about their work. Balint, can you kick us off, please?
As soon as I find the unmute button, yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Balint Pette, and I'm here because I've been a program evaluator working on various federal clients for over a decade, I want to say. And I currently lead our program evaluation team here at Summit, and we are serving a really wide range of federal and not-for-profit clients as well. And I want to say that program evaluation is my happy place, mostly because of the simplicity of the tools that it provides to us to get a grip on understanding the most complex government programs. And I'm hoping that by the end of the day today, we may be able to convey some of that passion to you all.
Balint, thank you so much. Awesome. Can you please do a quick introduction and we can get to learn about you and your interest in program evaluation?
Sure. I come at program evaluation, from I guess a foreigner's perspective. Coming into the U.S., one of the things we take for granted is that programs seem to work, federal programs, state programs, and all this happens because people measure and they test and they respond back. So I've been, I trained in program evaluation, and I've been doing program evaluation for the last 10 or so years, thinking about evaluation from quantitative and qualitative ways of building evidence about what's really working. So I'm really excited today to be able to share some of these evidence building approaches with you.
Thanks so much, Qasim. Teresa, can you share kind of your background as well, and then what you find exciting about program evaluation?
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Teresa Klein. I'm a senior consultant with Summit. I lead mixed methods program evaluations as my job here, but I really specialize in the qualitative methods. So we can think of that as any data obtained through like firsthand observation. So things like focus groups and interviews might come to mind. And I've always been interested in those types of methodologies. My educational background is in anthropology, which is all about going out into a universe and trying to convince as many people to talk to you as possible. I like that people are complicated and messy and we don't fit into neat little boxes. And I love that qualitative methods are a really great way of digging into that nuance. So looking forward today to focusing on qualitative methods during our discussion.
Thank you so much. Well, today we don't look too messy, but we're doing our best to kind of bring it to everybody. So thank you so much, Teresa. Sarah Cunningham, we'd love to hear from you about your background and then, how your work connects to program evaluation.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Cunningham. I'm also a director here at Summit. I have been working on developing, implementing, and improving government programs for about 20 years. And that's when I really fell in love with the power of data combined with what story is it telling and the power of an amazing question. A lot of program evaluation, evidence building is about asking the right question to help us drive better outcomes for the people and communities we're looking to serve. So a lot of where I get involved in program evaluation and performance improvement with Summit is really looking at how does it fit into the big picture? How can we use whatever information that we have to better understand the program, to be able to answer questions about program delivery, but also to start making cases for strong budget requests, to be able to start looking strategically and helping our clients understand what are some of the opportunities to use the information that they have to spread the word of how well their programs are doing or what their needs might be to be able to get that budget passed or to otherwise get support for an evaluation to hopefully, dig in a little deeper. So I'm really excited to talk about that with you all today.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And, we did not mention, I want to make sure you know that you're welcome to send questions to the chat. We are happy to answer questions as we go through the webinar. You can also ask us questions that we can get back to you on if you want to include your contact information so that it's maybe a bigger, broader question that you have. So today we're going to cover a couple of things. And as you can see, we have a number of panelists. And so we're going to focus on their specialties, although each of them can talk about deeply about program evaluation across the different areas. So Ballard is going to provide you with an overview of what is program evaluation, how do you design a cost-effective program evaluation if you need to think about that from an element, and what does that mean for sharing information with policymakers. And then we are going to go over the different types of methods. Qasim and Teresa introduced themselves as a specialist in certain areas, but they can do all of it. Today, they're going to talk about their love of the certain areas that they focus on. Qasim will talk about quantitative, and Teresa will talk about qualitative methods. And then lastly, we're going to talk a bit about how this all relates to evidence-informed policymaking and how we can use evaluation as a tool for helping to think a bit about what policymakers should want to actually learn from this and perhaps even change programs, add to programs, or redesign programs. And Sarah will kind of really highlight that throughout the webinar. We're going to ask our last polling question. Promise we won't bug you anymore about polling questions, but we have one more polling question we'd like to go ahead and ask you, which is, what are you interested in hearing about? We want this opportunity before we start to kind of hear if there's certain areas of the webinar that are more interesting to you. And we'll make sure to highlight that, and we can make sure to circle back at the end of the webinar to make sure we've touched on those things. So feel free to answer the poll question, and then we'll keep moving so that we can have some time for questions at the end. So Ballard, can you kick us off by giving us a really good quick introduction to program evaluation? What is it, and what different types are there?
Sure thing. Thank you, Kate. Happy to do that. So what is a program evaluation? Like, we would first want to define what a program is, obviously, but we understand programs as a set of activities that intend to reach a certain confined set of purposes within the government or anywhere, basically on the private or non-profit sectors. The program evaluation is a systematic way of collecting data or evidence from that given program and using it, analyzing and using it on the program to assess its effectiveness, efficiency, the equitable way of the implementation, and importantly to help and to contribute to continuous improvement of the given program. As for types, there's a really wide variety of program evaluation types. Mostly, we like to think about them along the program phases, like in what state of the program implementation is at. So, but depending on time, really, depending on where we are in the implementation of a program, the program evaluation type and purpose will be different and can come to different, will address different goals. So, for example, if we go from formative evaluations is the one end, and impact evaluation is the other. Formative evaluation comes before the program even starts being implemented, to assess whether the planned activities in that program are actually likely to achieve the desired outcomes, even before the activities get started. That's what we call a formative evaluation. Then the next one, what the program already starts, implementation is underway. We will want to understand whether that implementation is actually serving the purpose, whether the program is actually likely to achieve its intended consequences in the way it's implemented. So that would be an implementation evaluation. And outcomes evaluation, excuse me, comes a little bit later when then the first outcomes start to show. Like, so for example, an easy to understand example is say an unemployment insurance program. The first outcomes of an unemployment insurance program will be not necessarily the reduction in unemployment. That's more like the impact thing. It's more like how many claims have been how many unemployment claims have been processed. So an outcomes evaluation will actually evaluate that, like the success at which the outcomes have been accomplished. And then later on, even potentially after the closure of the program, is when these outcomes turn into impacts. So in case of an unemployment insurance program, hopefully unemployment is lower, and that's an impact that will take effect in a longer period of time. And an impact evaluation is to assess to what extent that impact can actually be attributed to the program.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Sarah, did you want to offer a bit about kind of how this fits into policymakers' goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Balint, you made some great points. There's a lot of really the program maturity feeds into the type of evaluation, but also the organization's maturity, the agency's maturity. Is it a recovery program that is getting started and you're trying to think about how to evaluate? Well, my number one goal is to get the money out the door quickly so that people who are hurting get some relief. That really can, those types of situations can shape what you have available in the back end and how you can kind of weave those things together. It also is a function of the culture. So, do you have an evidence-based or evidence-informed policy-making culture within your organization? Or is that something where you need to start to work through and get some buy-in? being able to have some conversations with your policy officials, see where they are, who are the stakeholders at OMB or on the Hill that really have an interest in this program, and kind of get some of that context. And then as for how it then feeds into the larger construct, it's amazing. We have now, especially with the enactment of the Evidence Act, CFO Act agencies have really been building the infrastructure and collaboration to help not only build the lessons learned for their programs and the infrastructure and cultures needed to kind of get the information needed to make those better decisions today and tomorrow, but they're also looking at how to work together and collaborate with each other to pull that up higher. And people are interested, they're paying attention. So with that, they have developed learning agendas that set out a path that is supported by annual evaluation plans and agency policies on evaluation. They've also got capacity assessments. So if you're curious where your organization is, you can go and look at your learning agenda and your capacity assessment to see, here's where we want to go and here's where we are today. That can help inform what type of evaluation you may be looking at. Is it something where you're really in the nascent stages and looking to build up? Or is it something where there's a robust evaluation community within your organization that you can draw upon? The learning agendas themselves are especially great because they are focusing the attention on building and using the research and evidence that's really needed to solve big problems. So sometimes it's beyond just your program. It's looking at something like equity. It's looking at something like how we reach historically underserved communities and individuals. And it's got some elements that are even more exciting when you're looking at cross-agency plans. So there's the American Rescue Plan Equity Learning Agenda that's really setting out a path to answer the extent to which ARP investments have supported equitable outcomes, and what strategies help them get there. What other strategies may be needed? So you can go to evaluation.gov, take a look at some of these resources, and sometimes that can help you with understanding the larger context and how your program fits in and things that you may be able to leverage there. There's also Results for America and the Data Foundation, great resources to be able to think through the standards for evidence-informed policy and how to build that infrastructure and culture that's needed to support these efforts. And also, at the end of the day, being able to really look at this as an opportunity with curiosity. The key is making sure that you're making the most of what you have, especially in a context where budget may not be there, resources might be there. If you have those types of gaps, what assets do you have? What questions can you answer with those assets? And then being able to use those to inform your budget requests, using those to inform briefings for policy officials, using those to inform questions and stakeholder engagements. So you can help to start pull the quantitative and qualitative picture together for a better holistic understanding.
They're so helpful. Thank you so much. Lisa, did you want to flag, perhaps we have some questions we could start with, and we can kind of move through and move to methods after that?
Yes, we do have a question that just came in. It's for an agency or program that hasn't really done evaluations. This can be a lot to take in. What should we do to get started? It's a great question.
Great, Sarah, can you start with that? And Bella, maybe you can piggyback.
Yes, I love this question because it really is, you can start from anywhere. It's really about starting with a question. When you don't have a lot of evaluations or things like this, starting to look at, are there programs or places that are similar? And just taking a look at evaluation.gov, getting an idea of what's out there, being able to have conversations with other entities within your organization. So maybe you're a program person and you want to talk to your finance folks. You'll want to talk to your budget folks. You'll want to talk to maybe other program areas, or if you're in a CFO Act agency, connect with your strategy team, talk to the chief evaluation officer staff. Being able to have some of that understanding and starting off with making those relationships within the organization is a really great way to get started, to understand what you have. And then being able to look at like evaluation.gov, some of these other things to get some ideas, and then network with your fellow agencies. If you're working on a program that is a transportation program that's looking at, well, what are the communities and how to best connect communities so that people have access to education and transportation, maybe there's somebody at HUD that would be a great person to talk to. If you're looking at justice reentry, maybe there's somebody at Department of Justice, maybe there's also somebody at USDA who is looking at reentry issues for rural areas. Be creative and think about who are other people that might have similar questions and ask them what they're doing.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I also want to bring an example where we did exactly what the question is asking. Specifically, the Consumer Product Safety Commission was hired the summit team to set up a program evaluation function. And so what we came in to do is first did sort of like a needs assessment, really a mini survey to understand, to break down what exactly the need is. Do they want to just learn the ways in which program evaluation is done? Do they want to have a tally of their own existing programs, and whether they are already running some version of a program evaluation, and whether they want to channel that? So like it started with a little bit of a needs assessment. Then we followed up with a training where we just did a training on not just the tools of program evaluation, but also the environment, the legal framework, and the current priorities of the government, and then we actually did for them an inventory of existing programs and existing potential evaluations. And so this way, we actually not just gave them the knowledge on one hand through capacity building, but also got them started on thinking about their own programs in a structured way, and getting started on starting to ask the right questions with the tools that we are providing them. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. We'll talk a bit more about discovery as we go through the webinar. Now might be a good time, as you kind of heard some of the things about evaluation and how agencies can use them, and what the considerations are. We'd love to hear a bit about our methods, the different approaches. So Qasim, can you please give us a sense of what area you love and how you use that tool to be able to think about program evaluation?
Thank you, Kate. And we've heard a little bit about a few snippets about collecting data, analyzing data. I'd like to focus on quantitative methods. And implicitly, we're talking about crunching numbers. Quantitative approaches are underpinned by the availability of data. And so there are multiple quantitative methodologies out there that we can think about. There's administrative data analysis, outcomes and impact evaluations. I'll focus on administrative data analysis to get us started, and specifically because it's cost effective. Most organizations or programs collect data in their day-to-day operations or implementation. It just happens. People are collecting data. So why not start our analysis there? And notably, this administrative data are typically collected for operational purposes. We want to understand the personnel working on a project, the demographic data about the people we're reaching, financial data about implementation steps and tasks. And so they're not typically intended for answering research questions. So there has to be some effort that we spend up front to assess the data quality and to kind of clean it and shape it to enable us to answer the questions around evidence building activities that are going on. So we'll have an opportunity to circle back and talk a little bit about the data cleaning challenges, et cetera. But typically you want to ask about the data that you have available or are collecting. What time period is this data covering? Is it the desired reporting frequency? Are we only collecting this data once in the year and we want to ask a question on a monthly basis? That might not be helpful. Are there missing data? And if so, are these data systematically missing, meaning for a particular circumstance, group, situation that the data are always missing? That could be an indicator of some kind of bias. And then, duplications and invalid data, et cetera. So once you've addressed these challenges, you can use administrative data to provide analysis ranging from descriptive statistics or visualizations. For example, if you want to describe the gender and salary makeup of a workforce, folks at Summit and some of your organizations that on this call. And you can take the data and do some hypothesis testing, statistical analysis or regression analysis. Let's take a bank or an institution that issues loans. We can use a loan application and origination data to determine if there are differences in outcomes for minority borrowers versus non-minority borrowers. And where administrative data gets really interesting is how you can enhance this analysis. So if we're thinking about equity, we might want to start asking questions about what about loans and outcomes for a group of banks, et cetera. So what we want to do is we may pull in data from financial data or census data, financial data, say credit profile data from Experian or some similar institution, will enable us to answer questions around what's happening with who has access to the loans. If we're looking at census tract data, then we can look at neighborhood effects and whether it matters and where you live in terms of being able to get a loan. So there's a lot you can do with administrative data, but thinking back to other quantitative approaches and our program evaluation methodologies are generally driven by the type of research questions as Sarah has emphasized. So if we want to address questions around the intended outcomes of the program or policy we have in place, then we're talking about using administrative data or survey data to compare pre-program and post-program conditions, the outcomes. If we're interested in whether a program or policy worked, that is, did it have any impacts? Did we lower the unemployment? We can leverage administrative data to design quasi-experimental approaches. Regression discontinuity, propensity score matching. Essentially, we're statistically crafting comparison groups, or we can go a little bit further with apply a little bit more rigor and run a randomized control trial, or measure the differences in outcomes for control and experimental intervention. And if we're interested in assessing the costs, how much does a program cost? What are the benefits? From a policy perspective, do the costs outweigh the benefits? We're really thinking about cost-benefit analysis and cost-effective analysis. But that's a lot to digest. But at a high level, these are some of the questions I ask and get excited about when it comes to analysis. But I want to pass this to Teresa to think about it from a qualitative perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Kasim. Yeah, when we think about it from the qualitative perspective, there are a really wide variety of methodologies that are available, to pick depending upon the need of our specific evaluation. So, I've already mentioned focus groups and in-depth interviews, but we've also got literature reviews and environmental scans, process maps, participant observation, questionnaires. I mean, there's a really long list that we're picking from, basically anything that's not hard numbers. So when we're figuring out, what's the right mix of those methods to use for the particular need, I would say there's a couple of different types of questions that we ask. And some of these go back to, similar questions that Kasim was phrasing. So first, we'll be thinking about what is the research topic? Is it about auditing processes? Is it about best practices in disaster communications? Like, what's the actual topic? And so maybe you decide that there is already a lot of information that's out there on that topic. And in that case, you might start out with like a literature review, right? We want to see what's out there. And that can also highlight any gaps in the knowledge and help inform your eventual recommendations. We might also look at the specific research question. Some research questions might be harder to capture via admin data, especially if it's something messy. So things like, motivation. Why do people react the way they do to an ad campaign? That might be harder to get through the admin data. Sometimes we'll think about feasibility too, depending on, who you're trying to reach out to, who the source of your data is, the type of contact information you have for them and how reliable it is. You might decide that maybe it's easier to do a survey of your entire population than it would be to try to do, let's say, like 50 in-person, in-depth interviews across the country. So there's a lot of different considerations at play here, and we'll often mix and match and use, many complementary different approaches. So maybe if I could just kind of provide a quick example of that. So Summit is currently part of a team that is working with the state of Montana to help develop a strategic plan to improve broadband access across the state. And our team is responsible for outreach to, see what Montanans think about this topic. And so in order to really try to get at, the wide variety of opinions from different groups across the state, who are scattered in some very rural areas of the state, we've combined two different qualitative approaches. So the first is a survey that we are blasting out across the state, really trying to get that broad geographic range, and that's giving us that wide reach. And we're pairing that with in-person outreach sessions. So you can think of these like town halls or large focus groups. And we're doing those across the state in specific cities with specific stakeholder groups. So for example, we'll have a session specifically with libraries and library representatives, or with healthcare representatives, folks who work in hospitals or clinics, and really dig deep on what does that particular group feel the need and the challenges are. And by combining those approaches, we're looking both to get a wide breadth of information as well as deep understanding of what's happening. So that's just one quick example of like how we might pick a mix of approaches depending on our need.
That's great. Thank you so much, Teresa. I think part of what we've been asked quite a bit is that it's not uncommon for folks to go, why can't we just stick with the quantitative data? Data. I want to hear about the data. I want to analyze data. And I'm sure you have a reply for that. So I would love to hear what you respond when people ask you that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do hear it. It's kind of fair because qualitative methods, they can be time consuming, they can be expensive. I think more folks tend to be familiar with the quantitative methods as well. But there are a ton of reasons why these qualitative methods are super, super valuable. So first, and I think both Balint and Qasim have already raised this, sometimes the quantitative data just isn't there to answer your question. There might be timing issues, maybe the data collection won't be done until after you need to have answered your research questions. Maybe the data is unreliable. Qasim talked about missing data. It might just not be there. So you need to think about another way to collect the data to answer your research questions. But also beyond just the logistics, these methods let you dig into the nuance and answer those why questions that can be a lot harder to address through strict quantitative methods. Things like opinions, perceptions, values, and you're really getting the direct respondent voice here. Like you're talking to somebody, you're asking them to give you information. And not only does that provide like deeper, more nuanced information, but that can actually be really important when we're talking about issues of equity, making sure we're talking to the right folks, making sure we're understanding the context that they are reacting in, right? Why they're reacting a certain way, why, like, let's say if we're talking about loans, why they're not taking out loans, that might explain if there are demographic differences in loan uptake rates. So it can actually be really important in understanding issues around equity. And then I would just say that qualitative methods complement quant methods really well. It doesn't have to be an either or, and frankly, it shouldn't be. We love doing mixed methods evaluation. So that's when we're pulling from both sides, the quantitative and the qualitative. Those make for really strong program evaluations. And to provide a quick example of that one, we have conducted an evaluation for the SBA on their disaster assistance loans program, looking specifically at why so few people who are eligible for an additional mitigation loan that would fund like additional fixes to homes and businesses to protect against future disasters, why so few people are taking out those mitigation loans. So we did an analysis of administrative data of the loan data that showed us, really, really low uptake rates. We looked at differences by demographic, where they live, the type of disaster that they encountered, things like that. But we paired that with interviews with actual loan borrowers as well as SBA loan officers. And that really told us why was uptake so low. That answered that why question. And what we found out from those interviews was that a lot of people just didn't even know that this additional piece existed. And the folks who had heard of it weren't really sure how that was different than the loan they already had. And so if we hadn't done these two methods together, we never would have been able to make actionable recommendations for the SBA. And we ended up making recommendations around revising communication materials to better explain to folks like what this option is, how it's different from what they have, and why it's a really great benefit to them. And we're actually currently working on an experiment right now with the SBA in which we're testing whether that new revised communication material is having an impact on the mitigation uptake rates.
And let me add to that a little bit, because I'm maybe by birth more like a quantitative guy, but over the time, over my experience conducting evaluations, I've been thoroughly convinced that purely quantitative methods are not the way to go, and specifically in the opening phases, and we're going to be talking about discovery a little bit later. Going into a program evaluation, the structure is not always very clear. Like sometimes it's messy. So you want to channel the various pieces of information into something that then can be that you can then ask quantitative questions about, and that phase early on, when you do the structuring from the messiness to the structured, that's when the qualitative methods come in handy. Oh, I mean, aside from the ones that Teresa has been talking about.
Yeah, and just to underscore a point that I love and is so critical, you don't know with quantitative data where your biases are unless you're doing the qualitative understanding, where did the data come from, and talking to all of the people who are a part of the program, building trust with the folks in the program to understand from the respective perspectives what's working, what's not, and building that trust so that you make sure you get the right question to be able to help improve your program.
I just want to jump in quickly, Kate, if I could. We had another question that came in. What if I know the question I want to ask, but the data isn't there and gathering it is expensive? Do you have examples of how an agency addressed something similar?
That is a great question. Thank you. And I think we have a few folks who'll be happy to jump in. It's kind of a little mix of both. And so I'm going to start with Qasim, because Qasim, what if the data isn't there and you're the quantitative person? How would you approach that?
I think there are two things here that I want to emphasize, and that is discovery, and we'll dig deep into that in a moment. But I think establishing why you want to ask that question, the end goal of, why are you specifically asking that question? Once you understand why you're asking that question, then you can go through a menu of, okay, where do I get this information from? I don't currently have it. And it may be that you think you don't have it, but you can reshape administrative data that you currently have to reflect part of the answer of that question. And so thinking about another example for a study we did for SBA, we had an interest in understanding succession planning within the agency. And the data that they typically collect were just on administrative, what's happening with promotions, what's happening with merit payments, what's happening with dates of hire, how long have they been here. But the data were not being collected to answer very specific questions around how long between one merit to the one merit raise to the next, etc. And so you could have said, I don't have the data and I'm going to go out there and ask a survey and collect all this information, answer this, go out and do interviews. Or you could sit and really look at the administrative data and reshape it. And you're like, okay, I don't specifically have a very good measure for this is when someone started to have an idea of when they want to work towards a promotion and they're going through the process of additional training, et cetera. But I do have information on the frequency of a whole bunch of people in terms of when they enter the service and when they get a promotion. And I can make some inferences about the associations between length of service and promotion. So that's one approach. And I've somewhat mentioned the second approach. Sometimes you just have to craft a data collection effort and you ask yourself the merits of doing a survey. Surveys tend to be expensive, so I would lean on what can I answer before administering a survey. And Teresa, I'll pass it back to you in terms of there's some basic questions that you can ask in smaller settings from a qualitative perspective once you really, really understand why am I asking this question.
Yeah, thanks, Qasim. There's a lot we could talk about here, so I'll try to keep it brief so that we can also, get onto other topics as well. But this is a super interesting question, and it's really, really important. And I think it's a lot about being creative about the mixing and the matching that you're doing. Which methods are we using, and how are we making sure that they're complementary? Maybe we're looking at how they fit together to say, like, okay, here's a gap I have, so I'm going to do this, data collection, and looking to make sure we're not overlapping too much. So like Qasim was saying, with surveys, if we take a really close look at the administrative data, we have a really good sense of what we have in there, what we need to answer it. Then we can say, okay, here are our holes. So we need to do a survey that has, these questions on it. Who do we need to ask those questions up? And that might help us reduce the number of people we're sending it out to. We might say, oh, well, we're going to do, instead of a ton of primary data collection, we're going to do a really strong environmental scan to see what our best practices in this topic. And then we can look at your documentation and make recommendations based on that. Or to go back to the SBA example I provided earlier about the mitigation loan option, we knew going into it that speaking to loan borrowers, they were going to be a really hard group to recruit, and that meant that was going to be really expensive. So we were like, okay, we're going to supplement with the SBA loan officers, the folks who work at the SBA. That was a lot easier. It was a lot cheaper, right? They're already there. We already have their contact info. They know why it's important to talk to us. So that was a much cheaper data source that ended up being super, super useful. So I think it's really about knitting together your design and keeping those constraints in mind. And that is always something when we're designing a program evaluation, the timeline we have to get it done in, what's available, who we can talk to, what the budget is. Those are always things we're thinking about.
And there's also a resource available on evaluation.gov where you may be able to find related data from somebody else's evidence clearinghouse. There are 10 different evidence clearinghouses out there, publicly available. It's amazing. It covers everything from work evidence and labor to military families to reentry. It's a wonderful resource. So being able to just look through there and see is there already a data set or somebody doing similar work to leverage.
No, this is great. Thank you so much. This actually kind of leads us really quickly into the discovery phase. And I want to say that we've talked a lot about some of the issues that you kind of may describe in that discovery phase, or some of the kind of points you were going to highlight. But Balin, it'd be great if you can kind of give us a brief kind of overview of why that phase is so important. And if you don't have that phase, if you're looking to start out a program evaluation and you skip the discovery phase, kind of, it seems like it'll be a problem. So if you can highlight why that is, that'd be great.
Sure thing. Thank you, Kate. Yes, I mean, we have touched on some of this already, so I'll just also go quickly. I want to say that when we start a program evaluation, we always go in there with a deep understanding of the program itself. Of course, we do our prior research. However, program evaluation itself provides some very specific tools, and I'm thinking about logic models specifically here, help not only us, but also program administrators or recipients and participants to come together and develop a mutual understanding about the structure of the program, how the priorities align, like what are the priorities and how the program activities actually turn into in fact, the intended results and what those results are to start with. So this is a surprisingly simple list and of tools, of effective questions that we can ask, and to give it a little bit of structure that the team can go through and align their thinking. And this alignment actually then not just helps the program evaluation, but it helps to formulate the evaluation questions, the evaluation design, but it also helps the program implementation itself. in that there is now an agreed upon structure to the program and how it accomplishes its results. So that is the positive externally that that program evaluation provides. One example could be like, as we talked about the unemployment insurance. So what is the goal of an unemployment insurance program? Obviously, is to reduce unemployment, but how to get there? But the administrator may not agree on the timeline, or when do we think it's successful? What point do we measure the various metrics associated with the program, or the equity aspects? Like, what is it that we're anticipating an equitable unemployment insurance program to achieve? Through the logic model generation, these questions can be and will be answered, and all parties agree on the priorities and on the ways in which we accomplish them, and that is a very helpful tool and informs the discovery.
Great,
and it
thank
provides
you.
a foundation, right, for subsequent work.
Apologize.
Kate, my apologies. I just want to jump in and point out, a little bit more about the discovery phase. And this kind of harps back to one of the earlier questions we had from the audience in terms of not knowing what you want, how to measure, and what the program is all about. Sometimes you design a whole evaluation as a discovery phase, and we tend to refer to these as demonstration projects. So the whole project is designed around trying to answer the basic questions of what can I specifically measure? How can I specifically measure? What tools can I bring to the program to help me better assess what's going on? And so in one example, we have a client interested in understanding the linkages between hypertension among minority and underserved populations with negative COVID outcomes. So they want to answer the basic question that, can we encourage self-monitoring of blood pressure and education on lifestyle changes and hopefully lead to better outcomes? So this is a 3-year project just aimed at answering that question. And most of the activities involve, we are engaging in interviews, surveys, we're analyzing some administrative data, and we're collecting these from community health organizations, community-based organizations, and clinicians, practitioners. And the whole express purpose of these activities is to figure out what is the best practice in putting together a program that will actually help us to make these lifestyle changes for all parties involved. So it's the whole project is a discovery in a sense.
Thanks, Qasim.
We do have another question I'd like to bring in from one of our attendees. Can you talk a bit more about impact evaluation? In many cases, stakeholders have a strong interest in the end game. What are the long-term changes in social or economic conditions? But it's extremely challenging to connect those macro level changes with program activities. How does impact evaluation handle that?
Yeah, great. Sarah, can you kick us off? Oh, 1 second, go ahead, Balin.
Oh, I can't. I was going to address that, but if Sarah, you went there, okay. So I'll just go quickly. That is honestly a great question, because it's one of the biggest challenges that that impact evaluation actually faces. There is a list of statistical methods to disentangle the spurious effects of other, underlying processes that may impact the evaluation. So in case of an unemployment insurance program, obviously there is an underlying economy that has all its impacts on the job market. Like, how do you know that it was actually the unemployment insurance program that accomplished its impact? So the secret relies in choosing the right counterfactual. So there is a multitude of ways of doing that. I don't want to go into the details of that, but there is the people who actually, or there is the recipients of the program, and there is you have to find a set of very similar people or organizations or whatever the target group may be that did not receive the program. And similar is a difficult word to disentangle here, because that's what you need to find in a statistical way. Similar in what sense? Similar in geographically. They have to be similar on everything but the program recipiency. And usually the way this is, we used to say that the gold standard of an impact evaluation is the randomized control trial. So ideally, you would want to think about that early on as the program is implemented and select if that is feasible, if that is ethical at all. Sometimes it isn't. Select a group of people who you set aside that will not receive that kind of program. So if it's a training program, you don't know if the training actually takes effect. So you can observe a set of people to make sure that they do not receive the training throughout the program and compare their outcomes at the end of the program. This is easier to say than to do, obviously, because there's the problem of contamination. They will talk to each other, sneak into, the control group members will sneak into the training programs and actually get the education on the side. There is a series of difficulties. And sometimes to address those difficulties, we use yet other statistical methods, such as quasi-experimental designs that create the same kind of comparisons after the fact using statistical methods, which is less prone to contamination, but it is more, involved statistically. I'll just stop there in the interest of time. I see we're running out of time here.
Balint, that's great. Thank you so much. I know there's others on the call who wanted to jump in on this, because impact evaluations are always what we're about, right? We want to find out, are programs working? Are they being, conducted in the way they're supposed to be? But then in the end, what are they doing and how is it impacting their population or their audience? Teresa?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in on that. I think that also what Balint was saying earlier about the discovery phase is super relevant here as well. So, Balint was just talking about methodologically, how do we make sure that we can measure and prove that impact? But there's also this question of how do we connect in folks' mind? Yes, we can see from A to Z that activities lead directly to the long-term outputs. And some of that comes out in the discovery phase, where we're often, trying to include key program administrators or other interested parties, as much as we can, and having those conversations to both build the framework for us also helps them understand what we are doing as evaluators, what our goal is. It builds a two-way road, and that helps with trust and communication, so that they can see, that we are aiming to prove that endpoint. And then the logic models that Balint was talking about, these are a really great tool for communicating where those connections are. So a logic model is showing, here are all of our inputs, here are all of our activities, here are outputs, and then short, medium, and long-term outcomes. And the whole purpose of the logic model is to really visually depict how those connect. So you should be able to trace through a good logic model. These are the inputs, they feed into these specific activities, and here's how they directly map to our outcomes. And of course, an impact evaluation is looking to prove that they do have those outcomes, but this can be a really effective tool for showing people and walking people through, here is that connection from the macro level back to the actual program activities. And Sarah, I feel like you can probably expand on some of these pieces, especially around, building communications and buy-in.
Yeah, we could talk about this for another hour. Just trying to pull up some highlights. It's such a great question. I want to really kind of hone in on the idea of having the right question, because that's really what the logic model in the discovery phase is about. What is the question I'm seeking to answer, and being able to generate the connection between that question and the logic model to the value proposition for the program. Here's why it matters. That's how you get support for evaluation, both within the organization and, for funding. Another aspect of it is thinking of it as a maturity curve. So you may not be able to do a full-blown, thought-out scientific evaluation at the get-go to get impact, but you can start off with questions like, what do my application data tell me? Do I see demographic differences between what I was hoping to get for people applying for this assistance or participating in this program, and who actually did when I compare it against census data? each of those small questions can be a foundational building block to then say, hey, here's a better question we can ask and act on to demonstrate impact or make the program more impactful. It's such a powerful thing, because those data pieces, as you're building up the maturity curve, then you can say, here's what I can do with existing resources, but here's what I can do and the opportunity for the communities we serve if I were able to get some additional funding to do a deeper evaluation and to be more inclusive.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to the folks who have asked questions for this. We're about 5 minutes out, so we're going to kind of wrap up a little bit. I do think some of the key takeaways are really, there's so many things to bring from this webinar to folks kind of like jotting down ideas and kind of what they need more information on. So you can, of course, communicate with us after the webinar about that. But I wanted to kind of flag for Valentin and Sarah to spend like a minute or two just talking about some of the key issues that you want to make sure folks kind of take away from. What are the takeaway points? And then we can kind of thank our panelists and close out the webinar.
Sure thing. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. I think I may sound like a broken record, but that is because I love this very aspect of program evaluation, and that is the structure that it gives about a program and the thinking in again, yes, it is the structure. How you think in a structured way about how activities lead to outcomes and then eventually impacts. And that the reason I love this is because it's not only helpful for the program evaluation itself to ask our questions, but actually when designing a program, or when just like as a simple citizen, just understanding a new government program that is announced, in my head, I want to think about, will this lead to the intended results? We can use the same structured thinking as a program administrator, or just like as consumers or recipients of the program. So I think in that way, program evaluation is a very powerful tool, and it's worthwhile to study its methods.
Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. There's so many takeaways. I think one thing that really I love to kind of keep going back to is the evaluator mindset, or that curiosity and the desire to want to make things better, is at the heart of program evaluation. It's at the heart of evidence-informed policy, and making sure that that's, it's not seen as, here's the program evaluation folks over here, here's the budget folks over here, but it's really having a culture of program evaluation within your organization, encouraging that to be able to build the better questions, and to be able to seek out and leverage those opportunities to get information, actionable data to help your program improve, whether you're just getting started or it's a more mature program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'd like to thank the Summit panelists for offering all their feedback on program evaluation and spending a minute talking about what they love and they do every day for both federal and commercial clients. We also like to thank the registrants for joining us today. We really appreciate folks taking their lunch hour to kind of spend time with us today. Should you have any additional questions about us or comments about the webinar, I put the info@summit.llc.us in our chat, so you're welcome to reach out to us. And thank you again. We'll be back in another quarter with another webinar, so we'll send you some information. Appreciate everybody's time. Enjoy your day.